When I say Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, finished in port wine barrels, your brain probably goes straight to Angel's Envy. And we've talked about it on the show. We've talked about bourbons versus finished bourbons. Why does it say finished in port wine barrels on the bottle? Well, fortunately enough, I had a stranger reach out to me online and offer to give me his expertise on the topic. So today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Angel's Envy founder and Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer, Wes Henderson, to talk about everything from Angel's Envy and how it got started to Wes's father's previous resume before Angel's Envy that some of you might not realize. We talk about finished bourbons and how they're different from plain bourbons and why it's important to have that finished in port wine barrels at the end of the label. We talk about all sorts of things, and Wes did not hold anything back. He answered all my questions, and you guys know I'm a whiskey geek, and he didn't hesitate to answer any of my questions, so it was fantastic. I hope you guys enjoy this interview as much as I did, because it is an amazing dive into not just Angel's Envy, but the world of bourbon in the circa 2008-2010 era when Angel's Envy was being created. We get to dive into all of that and get, like I said, all of my geek questions answered. I actually finished this bottle, just had a little bit of a pour left in it, and finished it during this interview with Wes, which is a pretty great way to finish a bottle of Angel's Envy. But without further ado, I will cut to that interview now with Wes Henderson, the co-founder of Angel's Envy and Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer. Wes, first of all, I want to thank you again for coming on. There's so much that I want to ask, but I always like to start with something that I think is a pretty easy question. And that is, how did your love of whiskey begin?
From the womb, from birth. Really, that just, I'm kind of being goofy about it, but being born in the industry with my dad spending his entire career, my entire childhood, in the whiskey industry. I guess I've been in it, for 57 years, but did I really appreciate it and care about it and understand it for a long time? Probably not. So it's just over the years, as I began to appreciate Dad's legacy and appreciate bourbon, and all these things came together. And then now I'm probably one of the biggest cheerleaders for bourbon on the planet.
Okay. Now, where do you remember a certain time? Now, your situation's a little unique since you've been, in the bourbon world since birth, basically. Is there a specific time you remember trying it and thinking and appreciating it, or do you think you always had that appreciation because you understood with what your dad did for a living?
I mean, Dad was a scientist, and he'd be the first to say that. He did not, and really up until the last, several years, nobody cared who made the bourbon. And so, I understood bourbon. I guess I appreciated it from a scientific standpoint because I was always a science geek. So I'd go to work with Dad in the lab on weekends when I was little, and all I really understood, appreciated was the science behind it. And really for a long time, for a number of years, people around the world didn't appreciate the history of bourbon. So it wasn't until much later, that I really started understanding and appreciating and enjoying it. And I'm talking as an adult, you're not supposed to drink as a minor anyway, but you know what I mean? As an adult, As an older adult, did I really start getting the totality of appreciating bourbon. And probably just in the last 20 years or so, have I really gotten an appreciation and understanding and a diverse palate for bourbon.
Okay. Now, for those who don't know, could you maybe break down what that looked like, what your dad was doing prior to you guys founding Angel's Envy? And we'll get to Angel's Envy, what makes it different, and all of that good stuff. But prior to that, could you break down what that looked like and what led you guys to Angel's Envy?
Sure. Really what ultimately led us to Angel's Envy was, Dad had a 40-year career at Brown-Forman, created Woodford Reserve, Gentleman Jack Daniel's Single Barrel, a bunch of other stuff. I spent some time working there as well. Dad had been retired for several years when I decided to start Angel's Envy. So I went down and told Dad when I actually went up to Kentucky from Florida, told Dad what I wanted to do. And Dad agreed to come out of retirement and work with us then. So that's really kind of where it all hatched. But it was the culmination of years and years and years of Brown-Forman. The Dad was done. Really, and he could have been, should have been. Woodford was a walk-off home run, and that's not a bad way to end your career. But I kind of sucked him in. I'm like, Dad, this will be fun. You get to work with me. You get to work with your grandsons. And, it wasn't a hard sell. It really wasn't.
Yeah, he could have had a walk-off home run, and then he came back and you guys hit a grand slam together. It seems.
I think so. No, I think you're right. I mean, when we got back into it, we had no clue what we were getting into. And we didn't have any aspirations of doing anything other than creating a little craft bourbon brand as a family. We did not set a goal to be a global brand like we are now. If you would have asked me in 2008 when we started this thing, would I have expected to be where we are now? I couldn't have ever visioned it. Couldn't have ever pictured it in my mind, in my wildest imagination.
Wow. And so was it always to be a finished product, or did that come later? You just wanted a craft bourbon, or did you know that was what you were going for, was the finishing process?
When we first hatched the idea, no, we did not, develop it on the basis of being a finished bourbon. It just evolved that way. And getting Dad out of retirement, I wanted to really stimulate his creativity and not have him excited just to be out of the house again and working with us, but looking at things that he might have done years ago or ideas he had that weren't the right time or weren't perfected or whatever, and start talking about those things. And we kept coming back to secondary barrel finishes and as a key differentiator. Mm-hmm. And we needed and wanted to come into the market with something that was unique. So, that kept coming up in the conversation and coming up in the conversations. We're like, okay, that's a great place to start. We didn't necessarily think we were going to build the brand around finishing. That was going to be our first effort. But we had a number of different finishes we could do. But we knew we wanted to do a bonded release. We wanted to toy maybe with single malt, with other, mash bills and, unfinished whiskeys and stuff like that. But we just kind of latched on to finishing at Angel's Envy, and that's the sandbox we stayed in. And I wasn't always happy with being in that sandbox exclusively, but it kind of worked for us, and we were the first to really be successful with it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no doubt that Angel's Envy was the trailblazer for the finishing of bourbons. It's done overseas with scotches and with Irish whiskeys, but Angel's Envy, if you look into it, where the first big names in finishing, it was Angel's Envy. Now, obviously, I was not in the business of drinking bourbon at the time that Angel's Envy came out, so I can read about these things, but I'd love to hear it from the horse's mouth. I mean, what did the landscape of finishing, if there was even any, of finishing bourbon look like at the time that you guys came up with this idea?
There wasn't a landscape. It was a blank canvas. It really was. Back in the 90s, Jim Beam had released their masterpiece, which was a finished bourbon. I think it was finished in sherry barrels or maybe even port barrels. It's been a while. I've got a couple bottles, but it was okay. It wasn't great. It was very expensive, and there was no way back in the 90s you were going to support a price point for what they were wanting to charge for. Beautiful packaging, all that stuff. Wrong time, right idea, wrong time. Mm-hmm. So when we entered into the finishing arena, there was a lot of noise about, is this really bourbon? Have we pushed the envelope too far? This debate. It wasn't a huge debate, but there was some noise. I call it more noise in the background, especially by bourbon, let's say more bourbon purist types of individuals. Mm-hmm. But we had good, healthy debates about it, and we settled on, look, it's not bourbon, it's bourbon finished in port wine barrels. I mean, that's really, and that's what it is. That's what it says on the bottle. That's what's in the bottle. So it was the Wild West. It really was. But we were the first to capitalize on it. I still think to this day, we do it better than anybody else. We have an enormous amount of creativity in how we approach finishing. We have, different degrees that we do our finishing, and I think we just have a good view on how that should be done. Now there's a zillion of them out there.
Yeah,
which is okay, and some of them I like, some of them not so much. What I don't like is when you use finishing to mask whiskey that's kind of not so great.
Yes, and so that is what I want to talk about next. I don't want to lose bourbon versus bourbon finished in port wine barrels, but it is important that we discuss, because in some locations on the internet, there are finished bourbons being talked about as being exactly what you said, taking a whiskey that is subpar and covering it up with extra sweetness or with some other flavor of a different spirit or wine. And you mentioned when Jim Beam did it that maybe to you thought it didn't work quite as well. Angel's Envy, arguably, based on the success of it, works very well. And I'm curious as to different knobs that you guys turned or different things you looked into in order to get the kind of balance that you have that created this profile that is known for having that sweetness and that bourbon, and neither one really overpowering each other.
Balance is the best possible word I think you can use, and there's balance doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It means that the nuances have to be balanced in a way to where they work together. For example, you can still be all the way to the right or all the way to the left as far as a taste profile, but as long as when you are all the way to the right or all the way to the left, you have balance and harmony in those extremes. So I think that's the that's the key to it, is to have that, that rich balance. And Angel's Envy, we set out to do that. My dad was about subtlety in finishing, and we really embraced that. Even though when I jumped to the rye, when I created the rye, it was a totally different ball game on finishing. It was the extreme. But Angel's Envy, we liked the subtlety. We liked the fact that it was very approachable. Yet it had complexity. So it was something approachable for somebody new to the bourbon world. Mm-hmm. And there are some brands out there that are mentioned a lot of times with good introductory bourbons. Maker's Mark's a great one. It's one of those bourbons it's got a good presence. It's not too much. It's not too little. It's a good something to bring somebody into the category. I think Angel's Envy kind of fits there. But where we take it further, though, is that, and sometimes it's hard to have both. Sometimes it's hard to have that accessibility and the complexity. Sometimes you almost got to kind of dial it down to get that approachability. But we really got that balance of approachability and complexity, which is why I think it works so well. And it still does.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head that it's not necessarily a balance of sweet to spicy or bourbon to wine. It's that balance of you've got the sweetness that makes it easy for beginners to drink, but the complexity that makes it interesting enough to continue to drink, and that, veteran drinkers still enjoy it. Because as you've mentioned with covering up some cheaper whiskeys with finishes, as some brands are being accused of nowadays, some brands, you get the loss of balance isn't, it's just too sweet or it's just too spicy. It can be, it's nice and sweet, it's got a little bit of spice, but I'm only really getting the finish. I'm only getting this profile, and I'm getting these few flavors, and I can't really pick it apart any more than that. It's riding that line between being a flavored whiskey. It's not a flavored whiskey, but it comes across more that way to some folks. And the finishing process is not cheap. So when folks get sold these bottles that can be incredibly expensive, and that's the case, you can see how that balance is really necessary, which we do see with Angel's Envy. Is that the product of specific, I'm sure it's all of these things, but in terms of what you guys looked at, did you see anything with a specific type of port wine or a specific duration in the barrel or a specific bourbon that you put into that barrel prior to going into it? Or could you just break down how each of those factors played into creating the profile that you deemed to be Angel's Envy?
Sure. And let me go back just a little bit and address something you just said about harmony, complexity, and all those things. It's very possible to have all these wonderful flavors, but if they're jumbled up in one big mess, you can't pull anything out of it. Then you've got all these great flavors, but there's so many layers, and things are buried here and buried there. The nuances you can't really appreciate. And I think the true artistry in this is to be able to get it to dance between the different flavors and to layer it in a way to where you can experience, all those things, as opposed to the rye is another good example. I know I keep coming back to it, but because it's such a powerful flavor with that rum barrel finishing, that's where the risk lies with having so much going on in that glass then you can just get this big mess. But
Mm-hmm.
with the port finish, getting back to answer your question, there are so many ways to influence the final product. Certainly the bourbon you start with. We sourced our bourbon initially. To this day, we've never talked about where it came from. Everybody guesses, and most of the time guesses wrong. But it was part of a very famous inventory stock. I almost wish I could talk about it. Maybe one of these days I can. But so we got a hold of this inventory, and it was phenomenal. It really was, and it was so cheap compared to how much bourbon is today. And so we knew what bourbon we had. So how do we take this bourbon and achieve that finish that we want? And we talked about several different fortified wines. We talked about port, we talked about sherry, we talked about Madeira, Sauterne, you name it, all kinds of different potential finishing barrels, tequila, you name it, different wine, different other wine barrels. But I kept coming back to port. And honestly speaking, the port barrels were easier for us to get. So that was our jump point. It didn't matter where we started because we knew we were going to be able to make good whiskey, good finished whiskey, no matter which route we went. So, I had a good route to get the port barrels. I had a broker in Portugal. I tried many different types of port, and I settled on, I wanted to have port with a story, some exotic port that, they made five bottles a year and, all this something with a big backstory. But we ended up with Ruby Port, which is probably the least sexy of all ports. But it is a barreled port. Not all ports are barrel aged. So, we're also restricted there too. And we eventually moved to tawny. But the Ruby Port just worked the best. So that you're balancing the type of bourbon, the type of port, the number of uses of the port barrels for finishing, because if you're using them over and over again, you're going to get diminishing returns as you use them.
Right.
The length of time that bourbon is aged in the original barrel, the length of time that the bourbon is finishing in the secondary barrel, where you're doing this finishing. Are you putting it in a warehouse on a pallet? Are you sticking it in corners of a rick house? Where you're not just getting a finishing, you're getting a secondary maturation with the European oak. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it's a long-winded because there are a ton of factors that go into play there. So all those things have to come together in a way that created that layered, approachable, complex brand that is known as Angel's Envy now.
No, I think all that detail is necessary because I think it helps put into perspective that this is not, you've got flavor A and flavor B, you slap them together, you get flavor C. It's much more complex than that. And
go ahead. Well, it is. And you can vary a blend by, here's a quick example, and I'm kind of going off the rails. Well, not really. Let's say you're doing a blend and you get this, you're blending all these different barrels together, and you find a barrel that has got this wonderful sherry or cherry flavor to it that you really love. And let's say you pour half of that barrel into the blend, and you're like, oh man, there's that cherry. I love that cherry. I'm not talking, flavored cherries, but you know what I mean? That cherry flavor that you get in bourbon. Mm-hmm. And then you think, well, okay, I want to kick that up a little bit. So the common thought is okay, we'll dump the rest of the barrel in there, the one that tastes so much like cherry, and we're going to get more cherry. Well, sometimes you can get that. Often it's possible, or you not get any results, or you can cancel it out. Mm-hmm. It happens on a molecular basis. So what the common realm of thought is that by upping one variable, then you're going to get that variable back expanded. Mm-hmm. It's possible to get it back expanded. It's also possible to lose it entirely. So that's what's fun about doing blending. So it can vary by 5%, 2%, whatever, and you can have a completely different ending.
Yeah. And I think anybody, if you've ever tried just home blending, like in a glass, you can see that immediately, that A plus B almost never equals C. It's always some weird combination of the way all the different things come through. And I do want to add a little bit of context too, because you mentioned the port finish, and a lot of my listeners tend to be newer into the whiskey world, and you might hear port finish and think, well, obviously they went with port. Port's so common with bourbon. But I want to add the context of what you said earlier when you guys did this. This was a blank canvas. So the reason port is now common is arguably because of the success of Angel's Envy. I think it'd be fair to argue that.
No, I don't even think you have to argue it. I mean, if you go back and look at what was out there, you know, there wasn't much out there at all. I think there was one in Washington State, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. But you know, we were the first, and then you know, boom, 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 everybody kind of came into the game, which I love. I love and all port finishes aren't created equal.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all finishes of the same, you know, variety of barrel are not created equal. I got into one of the biggest fights I've ever had with our marketing team years ago in a meeting for saying something boneheaded when we were talking about doing a sherry finish, and our marketing director, you know, exclaimed that we can't do a sherry finish because somebody else did it. I'm like, we're going to do our interpretation of a sherry finish. That's how we're going to handle that, and that's what you're seeing with all these other, you know, it's their interpretation of what that should be like. And I think that's why there's so many different ways to you know, to cut the cake in that regard.
Yeah, and they do truly come out, I mean, very different if you've tried multiple different finished bourbons. That's the other thing, is people like to think that finished bourbon is going to just taste similar, and that couldn't be farther from the truth, because different finishes can bring wildly different flavors, let alone the same finish at different spots in a rick house or different length of finishing, those sorts of things as well.
I can probably name 50 variables, that maybe even more, that come into play when, you know, we just mentioned a bunch of them.
Right.
But there are many more that we could sit here and just on a whiteboard and just boom, 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 you know, and go through them. Now, do we factor every one of those things in every time? No. But there are some that are very key that we have to monitor, and we have to, you know, to make sure that we adjust those variables to get the result that we want. All the others aren't as important.
Right. And I imagine a few of those main variables are the ones that you really need when you're looking at quality over time, continuing to give out the same product and have it be consistent. I imagine there are a few that you're always trying to make sure, if you have to, you know, change up any one of them, you want to make sure the product still comes out consistent.
Got to have it consistent, and that's the pitfall of having so many variables, is that you have so many opportunities to lose consistency or to have drift, you know, in your taste profile. And we've experienced that, you know, in the past, you know, where I pick up a sample and over time, and you know, a sample that's 1 year from another, and I think, you know, man, this thing's drifted a little bit, and you got to recalibrate and dial it back in. But yeah, there are a lot of opportunities to screw it up with all the extra variables there.
Yeah. Now, what does that look like from your perspective, keeping track of that drift over time? Do you guys just have old samples, or did you always compare back to specific samples, or how did that quality work, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, I think that we saw it most dramatically with one of our products at Angel's Envy. I don't want to talk specifics about it, but one day I picked it up and I'm like, man, this thing is, you know, and I wasn't doing daily testing, you know, like I was at the beginning. We had a team, and we weren't going back far enough to these reference samples. You don't have to do it every day, but you know, once a month, it's good to go back and pull some of your earliest samples and recalibrate if you need to, and once every month, once every 2 or 3 months or whatever. And we weren't doing that. So that's where you get that, you know, if any of your listeners or viewers are pilots, you know, like I enjoy doing from time to time, you know, you get this, it's a John F. Kennedy Jr. syndrome. You know, you're flying an airplane, and, you know, your aircraft slowly starts to turn one way or another, and your inborn ability to determine balance, you know, in your inner ear and everything like that, because it's happening gradually. You know, you heard the phrase "flying by the seat of your pants," right?
Right.
So, you know, because that drift is happening, and let's say you have no visual cues. Let's say you're in the clouds and you don't have the horizon, you don't have, you know, different things to be able to tell visually you're drifting. So, before you know it, you're drifting a little bit more and a little bit more, and your body's not responding to it because it's happening so slowly. And then you get into a situation where you've got a dangerous, attitude or whatever, and you crash your plane into the ocean. That's kind of a dramatic example, but it's that imperceptible drift that can happen if you're not constantly going back and cross checking, let's say, or I don't know if recalibrating is a good word to use as well.
Yeah, I know for certain I have at least one pilot listening. I actually went to school for aerospace, so the metaphor is much appreciated.
There you go. And anybody that flies airplanes, if you heard the JFK Jr. thing, the minute you heard it, you know exactly what happened. So,
yeah,
it's a very, very common scenario with flying.
yeah, and I can see how, if you were taking, this is the thing that I think a lot of folks, outside the industry, such as myself, just doing the tastings, don't think about. If you're tasting January versus February, and then you taste March versus February, and then you taste April versus March, you're going to have that drift and not have any idea, because they could be so close that you can't tell. And then when you get to December and try that versus January, could taste almost entirely different. You're basically playing a game of telephone with the palate, which is why, as you said, those quality checks are so important in that recalibration.
Your average consumer is usually not able to detect, like where I say, we get drift. Just because I see it, unless it becomes dramatic, the average drinker is not going to notice those things. But you're right. I mean, now that's one of the reasons, though, at the very beginning, especially because we were sourcing whiskey. We knew that we didn't have as much control over that source whiskey. We had control over what we bought and what the mash bill was and where it came from and everything like that. That's why I put batch numbers on the labels, is instead of pretending like those subtleties didn't exist. And by the way, with Angel's Envy is tremendously consistent. So, it's really not as much of an issue as I thought it was going to be. At the very beginning, I thought, okay, so we may have some swings here in taste profile just because of what we had to work with. And we were new at doing it with finishing. So why not put the batch numbers on the bottle? And instead of pretending those subtleties don't exist, we embrace them. And I visioned a database online, or, a forum where people could talk about different batches. And, we could keep a log of every batch number and the taste. We never did it. But I think in theory, it was a great idea. So, you embrace those, but you don't want to drift too far. You don't want somebody to pick up a bottle today and love the shit out of it. And then, 8 months from now, pick up a bottle and say, oh my God, I don't recognize that.
Right.
You definitely don't want that, but it's okay to have little discovery points as you go along.
Yeah. And I should clarify when I ask this, that you're absolutely correct. It's not like an Angel's Envy thing. It's any bourbon, any whiskey you've ever bought that's supposed to be a consistent bottle. They have to do those types of checks. I mean, they have to make sure what they're doing is going to be consistent. But yeah, having the batch numbers, or in some cases having single barrels where you can have those little nuances, that is also a fun aspect of the whiskey hobby as it is.
It is fun. And you can pretend it didn't exist. And like, we were inclined to do at the very beginning. You can say, oh, it's going to happen. But that was also, we were early to the game on that. You weren't seeing, we were one of the first brands to do these special blend programs. Now, the single barrel stuff existed out there, but it was few and far between. You had large accounts like casinos or, corporations or whatever that would, let's say Woodford, for example, and go do the special barrel. There may only be 20 a year that somebody did. And, but the special blend program we started years ago, where we did exactly what I was talking about, a little bit of this, a little bit of that with the consumer, was we were really one of the first to go down that road as well.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And definitely the single barrel game wasn't what it currently is right now either. So the small batches, the single barrels, it's another area that was yet to be discovered. It's important to put it into that context, especially for guys like me who weren't drinking it back then.
Yeah, well, it's huge now, as you know. I mean, single, you can't, you walk into a store and I almost think there are too many of them out there now, and they're very expensive.
Yeah.
I really weigh, when I look at a bottle that's, $129 or, 100, anything over 100 or whatever, I'm like, that's a single barrel or a special pick or barrel pick, whatever you want to call it, from a liquor store. Is it really, is it worth the money? Is it going to be that dramatically different? Some of
Yeah.
them are, some of them aren't.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to make sure it's either a liquor store or a content creator that you trust and like their opinion. Especially it can be the case with like a content creator. I just did my first barrel pick, and I promise this wasn't the case, but it can be the case that it's almost a little bit of like a money grab. It's almost just a way of putting something out there with your name on it. And they, as you mentioned, they can get very expensive. And
Yep.
I want to get to the reason we met, actually, because of a video that I had posted, and that is the finished in port wine barrels side of the Angel's Envy label. Now, I could give my opinions here, but I actually would love to just hear from you and your perspective and your breakdown of bourbon full stop period versus Angel's Envy and similar finished bourbons in the industry nowadays.
The difference?
Yeah, for those listening, what
Right.
makes it different and what makes you have to put that on the label?
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
and then we can just go from there.
And that's that's a good question. And as I talked earlier about some of the noise that happened when we started doing finishing, is that there are two categories here. There's the straight bourbon category that the TTB has, and then there's a specialty category, which is where, as of now, finished whiskeys sit in that category. So distilled spirit specialty is what it's called. So that was part of the debate. So it was very important to us, and we learned at the beginning. I don't really got our hand slapped, but the TTB really drew it to our attention that when we're doing advertising, this is back in the day, that we don't just say Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, Angel's Envy Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. And, you say, and it's a continuous statement, and this is what's required on the bottle. And if the bottle right in front of you says, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey finished in port wine barrels, it's a continuous statement. It's not, some of the first bottles had a line on that statement where it said Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and then a line, and then a line, and then finished in port wine barrels below that. We got into it, not got into it, but we had some discussions with the TTB. They didn't like that line there because it was not a continuous statement anymore.
Okay.
It's truth in what's in that bottle. And I'll always say, what is it? Well, it's exactly what it says on the bottle. That's what it is. So, it is Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey with an added step.
Yep.
It's really, I call it bourbon and more, to break it down in a very, probably far simpler way than it should be broken down. Does that come anywhere near towards answering your question at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to break that down for those listening because this has been a hot debate online. You saw the video that I had posted that ended up just huge debates in the comments, and I didn't even mean to spark the fire that I sparked, but
it was great though. I loved it.
Exactly. It's a great conversation to have. And I think there's almost enough, I don't want to say nuance because you can just throw the word nuance out there at a lot of things, but there's almost enough in the laws that you get people arguing both sides. So a bourbon has to be finished in a new charred oak container, which Angel's Envy is. And it cannot be aged. The way it's worded, it's almost like it can't be aged in a used vessel and just be bourbon full stop, which is why you can say, well, it's a bourbon that has then been aged in a used vessel. But it's important to always, on the label, have that is then aged in a used vessel. And I had that video where I basically, I think, said kind of like what you just said. I think I use a much looser metaphor, which is why some people were angered by it, that it's almost like you've got a caterpillar and then you've got a butterfly, the cocoon being the finishing barrel. And some people didn't like that metaphor very much. Maybe it wasn't a very good one. But I did also have a lot of people commenting. Angel's Envy comes by this very honestly. And it's even right here on the label about finishing in charred white oak barrels, and then having on the little added paragraph you guys have on the side there of the bottle.
Exactly. It was very important for us to be transparent from day one. And back in the 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011 or so, those years, you had a lot of new products coming to market, and there was some lack of transparency with a lot with the number of them, and in some cases, flat out uh, exaggerations or uh, omissions,
Hmm.
material omissions that people should be able to know about. And we felt very strongly at the very beginning the only way that we were going to be able to pull this off was by, and we talked about sourcing. That was a dirty word for a long time.
Yeah.
Even though distillers have been selling each other bourbon, hell, when Heaven Hill burned down, other people made their bourbon. Go watch the YouTube video of the Heaven Hill fire and
Hmm.
see all these warehouses burning to the ground and the distillery burning to the ground. And other people made their whiskey for them for a long time till they were back. They were back up. So we really thought it was important to I think that gave us a lot of legitimacy and a lot of respect in the with people that were initially skeptical. You're like, well, okay, if the Hendersons are doing it, you had Lincoln Henderson, who's the inaugural member of the Bourbon Hall of Fame. There may be something here, but it's interesting that these debates are still happening today. And I'll tell you, I encourage everybody watching this thing to listen to it. Don't take it too seriously. Really don't. Enjoy your whiskey, and however you like it is how you like it. And we can dissect the legalities and have fun with it. But that's all we're doing. We're having fun, and that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I reached out to you when I saw that video. I thought it was great, and I'm like, hey, this is cool.
Well, I appreciate that. And I totally agree. And I always try to have that little asterisk when I talk about these things, that I'm not by any means saying finishing makes a bourbon elite or makes it less than other bourbons. The whole point is just that it's a different process that you can add on top of making the bourbon.
There
And
you go.
being that I deal with a lot of beginners, whiskey noobs being the name of the show, I get a lot of folks who say, oh, I really liked Angel's Envy, and I've hated the other three things that I've tried. And they're naming three things that aren't finished, or maybe they're extra spicy, a little bit harsher. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't expect you to like those if you specifically liked Angel's Envy. And that's why I like to have that clarity for people, especially sherry finish, wine finish. They're all going to taste different. So I think that labeling is very important to helping folks to understand why it is that they like the certain things that they like, and being able to branch out from there.
For sure. And the labeling and the brand communication has to be consistent in that regards too. And that was where the disconnect was, I think, at the beginning with
Mm-hmm.
finishing, that the marketing department sometimes took creative license a little too far and didn't remember that it's not like you're trying to hide these things. You're pretending like they don't exist. It's just that, hell, like, it was a lot quicker for us to say Angel's Envy Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey than it was to say Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in port wine barrels, for no other reason than that. Some of our initial marketing was, we had to tweak it a little bit to really accurately reflect what was in the bottle, which I'm glad we wouldn't have done it any other way. I'm going to say I'm glad we did it that way. That's, we've always been that way, and we'll always be fully transparent like that.
Yeah, and I can't say this from experience, but just from what I've heard, any labeling in general can be very difficult as to what you're allowed to put on whiskey labels or any liquor label for that matter. So I imagine that it was, especially given that you guys were blazing a trail with this, very difficult to figure out exactly how you could advertise it, how you could put it on a bottle, etc.
Yeah, there was a lot of inconsistency on the part of the TTB
Hmm.
in how they approve their labels. You can have one person one day approve a certain wording, and then another person another day, not approve it. I think they're much better now, and it took forever to get anything done. Now they're much more streamlined. Most of it's done electronically, and you have a much more consistent application. And the TTB understands the category. Where they didn't understand it, it was the Wild West,
Right.
back then. So they just didn't get it. Now they embrace it, and now they get it.
Yeah. Now, I think since you're in the unique situation that you would know how, when you guys were crafting this, how it tasted prior to the port finish, how it tasted after the port finish. Same with the rye as well, but specifically with just the Angel's Envy bourbon finished in port wine barrels. How did you specifically, if you don't mind my asking, how did you specifically see the profile change from the finishing as you guys were discovering this specific recipe that you have?
Hmm. We really, I think we knew what we wanted,
Okay.
pretty early on, and we really, it didn't take us long to get there. It really didn't. We were just lucky in that regard. I got the right port wine barrels from Portugal, from the right guy. We selected the right type of port to start with. It was very complementary to the bourbon that we had. So
Hmm.
it wasn't that hard to piece it together. I wish, I'm not gonna say I wish I could say it was more complicated, because it really doesn't matter. But it didn't take us long to get there, because we knew what we wanted.
I'm sure it had nothing to do with the experience between you and your father, figuring that you were just lucky, right? Putting that together.
Well, I think that we were, and I appreciate that. I mean, that's
Of
very
course.
kindly put. But there still is a certain amount of artistry and ambiguity to
Hmm.
things when you start these projects, which is what makes it so exciting and what makes it interesting. I mean, you can have as much experience as you want, but when you start mixing stuff together, I think I have a really keen ability to think of a taste profile that I want and work backwards from there. Which is a kind of a different approach. Maybe I don't know how everybody else does it, but that's what I did with the rye. I knew what I wanted. I knew how the balance of the rum barrel and the rye would hopefully work out, and then I work backwards from there. So, you can have all the experience in the world, but there's still that artistry that comes along with it, and each painting's a little bit different.
Hmm.
Hopefully, that doesn't sound elitist, or I mean. But there is an art form to it. There's the science and there's the art, which is what makes bourbon so fun and so cool, right? It's all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I have been accused of being a bit too romantic about the artistry of it as well. I don't think there's anything elite about it at all. I think it's something that's accessible to everybody. And I've often mentioned how I love that it rides that line between science and art. Sure, if you add more rye to a bourbon mash bill, a lot of times you're going to get more of that spice. If you add more wheat, a lot of times you're going to get more of that sweet. But it is by no means, if you put this percent of this percent of this percent of this, you're going to get this flavor profile.
Yep,
It's
you're right.
it's an art form. But I do want to highlight that you said about picking what you wanted, knowing what you wanted, and then going for that, because I think that is a testament to the art form of it. I think a lot of times to the consumer, you might think these distillers probably throw something together, they find something that they think is bearable, and then they bottle that and make money off of it. But there is an artistry to it, and the proof is in the pudding with you saying how you pick what you wanted and then you work backwards from there and figured out how you were going to achieve that profile.
Yeah, just cross your fingers and hope that somebody likes it.
Right. Right.
That's I kind of joke about that. I mean, it's true. If it's got to be something that folks like. I do believe there's a certain amount of trust that evolves with your consumers over time, and if people like what you're doing, and they see that you're consistently doing things that they enjoy, they're more likely and more willing to try and to take your hand and walk on that journey with you, even when you push the envelope,
Hmm.
which I think is great. It gives you some license to, and that's really, I think our family reputation in the industry gave us kind of that license to be really innovative. People were going to, as I said earlier, well, the Hendersons are doing it. Maybe there's something there. So we had that credibility, and which gave us a pass maybe to step out of the box. And I want to continue pushing that envelope and continue to, with the people that are kind enough to watch this video, wow, I mean, we would not be where we are today without that curiosity and loyalty to bourbon and Angel's Envy and everything like that. And I want to continue. I'm retired now, but if I ever do anything else, I want to continue that legacy of taking that journey with people.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So, for those listening who might not know, you did step down from Angel's Envy. If I'm not mistaken, it was last year in 2022. Is that correct?
Yep, January. Yep.
Now, is there anything that you would like for folks to know about that you say is in the future for you that you can or would disclose?
I've been keeping busy doing some other stuff. If you look on my Instagram profile, and please tag it, it's at KY Bourbon Maker, at KY
Yes.
Bourbon Maker. I have a role in law enforcement as a death investigator, which is kind of an oddball. And that's kind of an extension of years in the fire service as a firefighter, like four of my boys are as well. So I've been keeping busy doing that. I did the collaboration with Metallica on Blackened, which came out September of last year. Blackened X, the Wes Henderson version of that, which was on the heels of the wildly successful Will It release that they did of Blackened X, and
Mhm.
they try to scoop one of those up. That Blackened Wes Henderson has gotten some amazing reviews. So and that was all for charity. That went to tornado relief in Western Kentucky, which is ironically I responded to that disaster as a member of the mass casualty team. So I mean,
Wow.
we went there and handled all those death investigations like we did in Eastern Kentucky. It was a weird 6 months. We had the horrible tornadoes in Western Kentucky, and then in Eastern Kentucky we had floods that killed a bunch of people too. So the team I was on responded to both Western and Eastern Kentucky and handled all those fatalities. So to be able to take a bourbon and work with Metallic, which was cool as shit, and Rob Dietrich, their master distiller, and create something that we know the money went to help people who lost everything was a real joy for me, and I want to continue doing things like that. I've got another collaboration with another brand that's happening right now. I can't really talk about it, but it's going to be a pretty big collaboration. So I'm just feeling things out. I am getting a little bored and itchy though. So we'll see but we'll keep talking, man. And I'll tell you what, first time something pops up, I'm gonna holler at you. We're gonna talk some more.
I like the sound of that. I like the sound of you getting itchy. I can't wait to see what the future holds for you, because I'm certain that if it's anything like you said, your dad could have walked away with the walk off. He came back and hit the grand slam. So if that's any indication, I think we're gonna see some pretty awesome things.
I hope so. I hope so. And you can probably hear my dogs barking too. The one thing about COVID that, just totally off topic, but,
Yeah.
before, when you did conference calls before COVID, if you heard a kid in the background well, first of all, we weren't doing it at home, but, let's say you stayed home sick, you heard a dog barking or a kid screaming, you were mortified. You were like, oh my God, it's so unprofessional. Now with COVID and all the Zooms we've been doing and all that stuff, it's like, hell, I should have just sat in my kitchen with the dogs barking and the kids yelling, which I don't hear anyway. After having 6 kids and 6 dogs,
Right.
you could drive a freight train through my kitchen and I wouldn't hear it. But it's kind of interesting how that's changed. So I don't even know why I apologize for the dog barking, because we're all used to it now, right? I mean,
I think so.
That's life.
And hey, thank goodness for it, because it gives people like me the ability to do this and not have to have the Joe Rogan money to fly everybody to me to do the interviews. So it works
Yeah.
out, honestly.
My kids asked me the other day, just yesterday, before yesterday, said, "Why don't you do Joe Rogan?" I'm like, "Well, Joe ain't called me yet, but yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be a fun. But it's tough doing podcasts like that because
Hmm.
being a brand owner, well, not a brand owner anymore because I sold it, but this is a whole lesson. Another lesson is that we're seeing extreme examples of this right now, where you have to kind of keep yourself away from controversy. That doesn't mean you can't have viewpoints and have values and run your company in a certain way that's supportive of people, but you got to be, everything you say is being scrutinized. So I mean, hell, I don't even know if I'd do that show if I was asked to, but maybe I would. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be a scary one. I mean, that biggest platform in the United States, if not the world, right now, I think.
You
So
can really mess yourself. You can step in it really big time if you're not careful. And we're seeing all kinds of examples of corporate crisis because of that type of thing. And bourbon, by and large, has kind of stayed out of the fray.
hmm
And it really, look, spirits and I mean, of course, we've got huge controversy about beer right now. These are things that should bring people together, and over a drink, and really be able to talk about civilly, talk about things that really matter in the world, and break down those barriers of stuff that gets in the way of us being real and being human with each other. So it's that's how I view it, and that's why I've stayed out of of that kind of stuff. Is I want to be a unifier with what we do. That maybe sounds a little hokey, but it's factual. Spirits have been, for thousands of years, have been enhancing our social experiences together, and they'll continue to do so, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the foundational reasons I say we drink whiskey in my first episode ever, is the camaraderie. It can bring people together. You don't have to be you have to be a certain age. That's the only thing, but you don't have to be from any specific area, any specific type of person to be able to enjoy it. And it's a great unifier. It really is. Any type of spirit.
For sure. As it should be.
Now, one more time for everybody listening, I will put it in the show notes, but people can find you on Instagram. That's correct?
That's right. Instagram and Twitter. I don't tweet a whole lot anymore. But yeah, Instagram seems to be the fun place where I hang out.
All right. Yeah, and I will put that down in the show notes so that everybody can find you. Although I don't think they're going to have trouble finding the founder of Angel's Envy. And for that reason, I once again have to thank you so much for taking the time out to have this conversation. I know as a whiskey nerd, being able to ask you these questions directly has been a heck of a treat, and really getting that behind-the-scenes peek at Angel's Envy and the industry. So thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. And keep doing what you're doing. Keep those debates happening and those lively discussions. And and I encourage, as I did a minute ago, if you're watching this, never take it too seriously. Have fun with it, because that's what we're here to do. And be civil to each other, and let's enjoy life and have a drink together.
Thank you. Yes, we will. I will keep that going, and I'm sure in the future I'll have to have you on to have some more discussions about it. Absolutely.
That'd be great. I would love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again. Have a good rest of your night.
You too, man.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Whiskey Noobs. If you need more Whiskey Noobs content in your life, make sure you check out our Patreon page in the show notes. And if you like the show, please make sure to leave a 5-star rating or review. It only takes a couple of minutes, and they're way more helpful than people realize. If you want to do tastings alongside the show, make sure you join the email list by sending an email to whiskeynoobspodcast@gmail.com with a subject line that says email list. You'll receive monthly emails with a list of the whiskeys that will be featured throughout the month so that you can buy them ahead of time. You can also find more Whiskey Noobs content on Instagram at @whiskey_noobs and on TikTok at Whiskey Noobs Podcast. Once again, thank you guys for listening. The Whiskey Noobs Podcast does not support underage or otherwise irresponsible consumption of alcohol.